everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today at the California State Fair. My name is Etienne Fontan. I am fortunate to be one of your ombudsmen for this exhibit for the past 2 years. And needless to say, this is a beautiful second location for us. We were over in Building 1 last year, and this year we're in Building 6. And you can feel the love and see it. It looks really great, so thank you all for coming out. My name is Etienne Fontan. I am a Louisiana native, but I call California my home and have for the past 30-plus years. I escaped Louisiana at the age of 18 and went to West Virginia and decided to join the West Virginia Army National Guard. While I was there, I decided to go to college, and while I was going through college, it was an experience that was, needless to say, very expensive. And my GI Bill basically just covered outright what you actually, the tuition itself. So I had to work, multiple jobs. And in about October of 1990, the National Guard unit that I belonged to, the 201st Field Artillery, one of the oldest units in the United States. It's actually from 1724. And it was christened originally by George Washington. So it's the 201st Field Artillery out of Morgantown, West Virginia, originally out of Fairmont. So my battery was out of Morgantown. So I basically was sitting in a college rec area playing pool with a couple of the guys I was in the military with, and we looked up on the television and saw that we got activated for then Operation Desert Shield. So I had 72 hours to pack up everything I had, say goodbye to my family, write my will, and off we went to, I was fortunate or unfortunate to be attached to the French Foreign Legion as their artillery support during Desert Storm because they don't do long-range artillery. They're kind of in-your-face kind of people, as we would call them. And I unfortunately sustained multiple injuries while in theater, was medevac to Germany, and found myself back home and then back at college at West Virginia University. And I was very confused because I went from pretty hardcore combat to being back on the street corner. And needless to say, it was very confusing. The medications that they wanted to put me on had all kinds of side effects that I really did not enjoy. So I had been turned on to cannabis, and I was going through initially was called back then Gulf War syndrome. I had been exposed to nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare from between the tipped rounds of the Iraqis, which were Russian, which were all uranium tipped, from their 51 calibers all the way up to their artillery rounds. And they were everywhere, all over the places where we went through. My unit was the left part. It got within 120 miles of Baghdad, went completely across Iraq, and we settled over by al-Basra, where we were under the oil fires. And to give you an understanding of how thick the oil fires were, outside of the oil fires, it was about 115 to 120 degrees. Rather severe. Under the oil fires, it was 28. Yeah, it was that cold. It was a surprise to me, too, to be in the desert and have a down zippered sleeping bag up over me as I sat on a 50 cal. It was one of those moments you find yourself and you're like, how did I get here? Well, there I was. So unfortunately, I was suffering from a wasting syndrome. I wasted down to 90 pounds. I went to West Virginia University Hospital and various other hospitals, the VA hospital in Pittsburgh. They didn't know what was going on with me. I didn't know what was going on with me. All I know is I couldn't hold down food. And as I was going through college, I said earlier it was very expensive, so I had subsidized my education by being a cannabis dealer. Now, I was not a good cannabis dealer in the sense of the quality of the cannabis was nothing of the quality of cannabis you experience in California. Mine was more southern of the border, packed with Coca-Cola to rehydrate it with black seeds kind of cannabis, where if you didn't have an album, you were going to have a hard time getting through all that leaf and vegetable matter and twigs to actually find something that would get you high. So that's just all I had access to originally. But when I was going through my wasting syndrome, my friends were like, hey, we have some access to some higher quality cannabis. Here, try this. And changed my whole outlook on life. Not only did it change my outlook on life, it helped me gain weight. I ate food. I ingested food. I kept the food down. You know, if anybody has had, you know, chronic nausea, it's a terrible, terrible thing, and it really eats at your throat. And so even eating becomes very painful. Sometimes I would actually have to have a tube put in so I could be fed. Not very fun. So what happened is I got tired of making criminals out of my friends because I needed to get this cannabis to survive, and I wasn't going to survive without their help or access. And I decided to leave West Virginia because I had limited options, mostly because I had been using my medical cannabis, and the day of my promotion to sergeant, I had smoked a joint, and on the way to, right before the promotion, they're like, Fontan, piss test. And needless to say, I failed with flying colors because I, like I said, smoked right before formation. So, and it was really good stuff. And so after failing that, they basically kicked me out. And that Monday when I went to college, they basically said, oh, Mr. Fontan, I'm sorry, you have to leave. Your GI Bill has been revoked, so you have to leave campus. So that was a shock. That was a fun shame spiral to experience. And I kind of withdrew and realized I don't need to be here anymore. I need to leave town. And my friend's like, hey, you're a bass player. We need a bass player in a band we're doing out in California. Come to California. And I came to California, and unfortunately, one of my bandmates had a heroin addiction. And one day I showed up, and everything I had was gone. And I was fortuitously sitting there flipping through a High Times magazine that I literally just bought. And it literally cut right off the stack. And I was like, oh, well, I'll take that. And it's next month's issue, right? So if today is July, this would have been the August issue I was purchasing. And as I was sitting there kind of sobbing in my own, everything's gone, but he left one damn lamp, I was flipping through this High Times and reading all these articles, and I realized that everything in these articles was 4 to 6 months behind. And it kind of hit me, well, if that's happening, if what I'm reading is 6 months behind, that means there's something that's happening now. And I was very fortuitous. There was an organization called the Cannabis Action Network, which was a group of college students that were involved and worked directly with Jack Herrera. And they moved out from Kentucky right to Berkeley, California. And I happened to walk through when one of their barkers was like, Cannabis Action Network, first meeting, it's an hour right up the street. And it was just about an hour to walk to there. And so my friends and I walked there. And when I walked in, there was a brave man there. His name was Dr. Todd Micarea. And if you're unfamiliar with Dr. Todd Micarea, he wrote a book called The Medical Marijuana Papers because he was a psychologist, and he actually was in the Army, and he started to find all this research regarding medical cannabis, and he actually put it into a book. And so he spoke, shook his book, and I was like, you're my savior. And he was like, come to me, kid. I don't have a Desert Storm veteran. I would like to document your illness and what you're experiencing with cannabis. So this is 1992. And so Can basically went out and did tours going around to college campuses, rock and roll tours. We did the first couple of Lollapalooza tours together. We did a Horde tour, which is Horizons of Rock Development Everywhere. So what happened is a lot of these tours liked that we were volunteers and that we were speaking out truthfully about cannabis, that they wanted us to be free speech people on these tours. So we went out, and we went out. I was fortunate enough in 2 years to do 47 states doing rallies, teach-ins, and tours where I would tell people, hi, I'm a combat veteran. I use cannabis because it saved my life. Just thought you should know. Give it a consideration, considering some of your other medications that they have you on, that there's lots of side effects on. Why does that mean a lot to me? Well, my mother was a hypochondriac. So she was sucking down experimental pills for decades. And then unfortunately, I watched it destroy her. It destroyed her nervous system. It destroyed her stomach. And the other side effects, as you all will know from either yourselves or others, the contraindications when you take one medication, now I need another medication to deal with the other. I wasn't finding that with cannabis. However, when I would go to the VA and tell the VA what I was experiencing, they basically labeled me a known drug user, called security, and had me removed from VA hospitals. 4 of them all over the United States: LA, Oakland, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco. And that sucked. So I channeled my anger and my rage, and I channeled it into growing cannabis. And I was very fortunate because the years I had worked earlier in Cannes, I worked as a volunteer for 2 years until I kind of burned out. And then a gentleman by the name of Steve D'Angelo said, hey, I have a hemp company in Washington, D.C. Why don't you come work for us and sell our hemp and get a better understanding and see where you are? And it was great. I got a massive education on hemp industrialization. We basically grew hemp in Eastern Europe, then had it converted for the thread, then into fabric that your jeans are made out of. And so Ecolution was, in the mid-'90s, actually selling 100% hemp jeans, unfortunately for couture prices that most people can't afford. So I kind of got burnt out on that, and I came back to California because I had to go to D.C. to do that for 3 years. And then I came back to California, and all my friends had marijuana dispensaries. And they needed a grower. And so I was known, and I was trustworthy, and they were my friends. So they're like, come grow my weed for me. And I was happy to grow weed. It was very therapeutic for me. I found something called grow therapy, and being around and taking something and bringing it to life. And it, all of a sudden, for me, gave me purpose. And not only did it give me purpose, I found an activism I was helping others understand, and most importantly, I was no longer making criminals out of my friends. I was taking that risk myself. And then dispensaries shut down, and then they were like, come work in my dispensary. And then in time, I was given part of what is now known as Buckley Patients Group, which is the nation's oldest dispensary. We're turning 24 years this year. And so I'm very thankful to have been a stewardship of that dispensary because it was founded by an AIDS patient. And myself, I had a wasting syndrome. So having cannabis and then having activism and giving back to my community, working in my community, growing cannabis in my community, changed my life so much. I met so many great people. I met so many people, unfortunately, at the end of their lives. And I saw so many transitions. Each one is absolutely painful, and each one is absolutely beautiful. And I have watched as a patient. I was given, back in 1991, 5 years to live. We're at 2023. Okay, so remember, it's called practicing medicine. Right? They ain't mastered that shit yet, apparently. So don't forget that. And so what we found is Buckley Patients Group felt the need to give back constantly. So we always realized that, hi, congratulations, you've just found out you've got stage 4 cancer, and the price of cannabis is very high. So we've been one of the original people giving compassionate giving. We saw Dennis Perone and the first generation of dispensaries, which are the original 7. They got shut down in 1997, unfortunately, due to the federal government saying, if you open up after this date, we're kicking your doors in. Berkeley Patients Group was the second and the first of the second generation to say, you know what? Fuck you. We're going to do what we want. We're not going to wait for you to grow this cannabis and provide it to us, which that is a whole other story, which the government actually does. And it's nowhere near the quality of what California is. So I have spent the last 24 years risking my freedom as a patient activist, as well as seeing what has become of cannabis from coming from the dark and coming into the light, as well as watching its transition as it's get here. So it requires our stewardship, our guidance to make sure this is what we want and this is what we want to see. This is how we arrived here. It was a lot of willing people and participants, and thousands of people helped us get to where we are, but we're not where we need to be. So that's why my council member here, Bryan Buckley, I am with also the Veterans Action Council, which was founded in 2020. That is a hat that I fly under and the hat that I'm wearing. We're a group of volunteer veterans we're regionally cannabis activists who are doing things and move things along. And we got together as a buddy check during COVID to make sure that we were doing okay. And of course, we wanted to make sure that our buddies were okay, because unfortunately, we as veterans deal with and have a large suicide issue that is a problem that we have everything from how it is documented to, unfortunately, it's taking friends of ours still. And so we work together, Bryan and I, we lobby together in Washington, D.C. On top of that, we're working together at the United Nations with a friend of ours, Michael Krawitz, helped get medical cannabis removed from the most dangerous drugs category in December of 2020. So it's now legal around the world. We're actually petitioning your U.S. Attorney General right now to follow the law and actually make cannabis legal in all 50 states and territories. So I want to thank you all for being here, but at this point, I'm going to kind of wrap up my story and thank you all for being here. Continue to get active, and visit all these wonderful people here, experience what is here with cannabis, and if you find something impactful, share it with others, reach out to others, and we'll see how it all goes from there. So thank you all very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bryan Buckley.
Thank you, sir. All right, this works. Good job. I got to stand. Sorry, I just flew up from San Diego, and my arms are killing me. No, joints are not feeling too hot right now, so I hope you guys don't mind. So, hey, my name's Bryan Buckley. I grew up in an area right outside of Philadelphia called Doylestown. Back then, we had like a massive high school football program. It was always like a top 25 team in USA Today. And I'm playing that. I remember like my junior year, I had a good game in the state playoffs, and the coach on the other team was a former Naval Academy coach. So I start getting letters, and I'm getting recruited to the Naval Academy. I'll never forget how proud my dad was. He's like, oh, my God, the Naval Academy. And I'm like, you go. And he's like, what? I'm like, man, I just want to go play ball in college, drink some beers, grow my hair long. If I got time, I'll go to class. I mean, that's just where I was as an 18-year-old. And then I woke up one September morning in 2001, and I turned the TV on. And I remember I see a World Trade Tower burning. And my initial thought was, man, I didn't think when Al-Qaeda did that in 1993, the building was burning that bad. And right at that moment, I get a call from a buddy who was playing out in Michigan. He's freaking out, and I'm like, man, what is happening right now? What are you talking about? And I saw the second plane go into the building, and that's when I just knew, you know, our generation, we lost our innocence. We were under attack. And things were kind of confusing that day on campus at UMass. I went down to the football complex, went to get taped up, and they're like, hey, I don't think we're going to tape today. I'm like, okay. We're kind of sitting there watching the big screen TVs. This is where I kind of date myself a little bit. Cell phones weren't what they were then, what they are now, so we were really attached to landlines. And we probably had around a dozen guys from New York City who were just totally confused of what was going on and couldn't get a hold of anyone. Coach comes in, we decide not to practice. He's like, all right, guys, go home, call your loved ones. You kind of see how quick life can change for you. And I lived with about 4 other football players, went out, got a couple cases of beer, and we were just watching the TV like everyone else. And that's when I started seeing people throwing themselves out of buildings. And I remember this woman, she threw herself out of the building, and I remember she was holding her dress down as she was falling to her demise ultimately. And I just started thinking, like, how bad of a situation is she in where she's like, this is my best course of action is to throw my body out of this building right now. And ultimately, she knew what's going to happen, but she did it with, like, dignity in a sense. And it just kind of spoke to me. And all my friends, everyone was talking tough and wanted to go kick some ass and all that stuff. And I know it sounds corny and cliche, but I just got up and went into the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and said, it's time for me to go earn my citizenship. And that's when I knew I was going to get involved in that fight. So finished out the season, informed my coaches, my teammates, and my family I was going to transfer to a school called Villanova University, get into the ROTC program, and originally I wanted to be a fighter pilot in the Navy. When I went to Villanova, we have a gunnery sergeant there. They're known as your assistant Marine officer instructor. He was a force recon baby. What that means is Susan went through boot camp and he went through School of Infantry. He tried out for Marine recon, made it, and he spent his entire career there. And he was a former drill instructor, the whole nine, looked like the Full Metal Jacket, all that stuff. And he said to me, he's like, you want to be in the Navy? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, man, that's kind of lame. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, you need to be a Marine. And I'm like, okay. And I mean, the guy was scaring me, so I was like, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And he's like, I think you need to go into reconnaissance. I'm like, cool. So went through my whole entire training, went through officer candidate school, and then had to go into the basic school in Quantico, where they send every new Marine lieutenant. Doesn't matter what your job's going to be in the Marine Corps, we all have to go through that. And I was selected to go into infantry officer course. So went through that, checked into 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines in Camp Lejeune, and from there did a deployment to Fallujah, Iraq. When I came back from that deployment, they said, hey, you did a pretty good job. We're going to give you a shot early here. Why don't you go try out for recon? If you make it, we'll give you orders over the Marine recon. Went, took that selection, made it, and they rewarded me by sending me right back to Iraq like 6 months later. I mean, I'll never forget smelling the Euphrates, and I'm just like, man, I'm back here again. I mean, if you ever smelled the Euphrates, it has a very distinct smell to it, and it's just, here we go again. So did a whole deployment there where we were operating pretty much in the entire Al Anbar province, which is western Iraq, where the Sunni population stays. They have the Triangle of Death. Obviously, you have Fallujah and Ramadi and some other spots out there. It was a pretty gnarly spot. When I returned from that deployment, we just stood up our Special Operations component. It's known as Marine Special Operations Command, or MARSOC. It is now being renamed Marine Raiders. So they said, why don't you go try a selection for that? I'm like, okay. So I think it was around 300 or something in that ballpark. We went to a selection, and about 25 of us made it out, and I was one to 25. And from there, they made me what they call a team commander, and gave me a special operations team. I was very fortunate. Usually you do one deployment with a team and you have to go do some admin stuff. They kept me as a commander my entire time when I was with them. So I did deployments to Southeast Asia, Africa, and then I was over in Afghanistan, in particular the Helmand province. The Helmand was by far probably the most volatile area on Earth. The reason why, it's in the southwest part of Afghanistan, borders right up to Pakistan. They have a huge area called the Helmand River Valley. We would call it the green zone because it's like a triple canopy jungle you're essentially fighting in, and you're looking up at these mountaintops. It's a very bizarre kind of like Donkey Kong world. It just doesn't make sense where you are. And why it was so volatile is the Taliban, after Croptober, you would see significant events like November 1st would just drop. They would head back down to Pakistan, hang out there. They had safe harbor for the winter. Springtime, they'd come back up, tell all the farmers to throw their poppy out there. They'd grow the poppy, cultivate it into heroin. They would sell that, and the Taliban would tax them, and that's how they fueled their insurgency. So it was very contentious. You couldn't get much done there. All the key decision makers, like people who own land, got out of Dodge, and you're basically dealing with farmhands who are like, hey, man, I'm just here trying to make a living. I can't really make a decision on what's going on left or right. What my team did is we were known as the commando team. So I was in charge of the 7th Afghan Special Operations Battalion. I had Afghan commandos and Afghan Special Forces. You guys probably heard a lot about the commandos in 2021 during that whole entire, whatever you want to call that thing, in August of 21. The Taliban were hunting down the commandos because they knew we trained them. And luckily, we were able to get 30,000 of them off of Afghanistan, and the governor of Guam graciously took them, because ultimately, guys, we're going to go back to Afghanistan at some point. I mean, just get ready for it. So at least we got some commandos ready to go when we go back in. And the other Navy SEAL, Raider teams, Green Beret teams were doing things called village stability platforms. So they would dress up in traditional dress, they would grow beards, and they would do everything from setting up a well to standing up a local police force to try to help build security and help them build a local economy so they could stand on their own 2 feet. Really wasn't too much of that going on. It really was pretty much more fire bases. You were just fighting the entire time. When we would fly into black helicopters in the middle of the night, we were going after high-value targets. And the Taliban, I'll give them credit, they loved to fight us. I mean, as soon as we'd come in there, we would do a raid at night. And then the next morning, you'd see women and children leaving the area. You'd see more Taliban just coming in. And we were going to sit and fight for about 48 hours. We'd have a morning fight. They would go away. You hear afternoon prayer. About 15 minutes after the afternoon prayer, we were going to get back into another fight. And we'd go until about nighttime. They backed off at night because we were very good at the nighttime. But that's when they would plant their IEDs and everything in there, which was probably some of the worst, our worst thing that we had to deal with were improvised explosive devices. So while I was in Afghanistan, this would have been in the summer of 2012. This is not anything to brag about. I just had a general come up to me one time and said, this has been the bloodiest summer for Special Operation Forces since the Vietnam War. We're losing a lot of guys. A lot of guys are getting wounded. A lot of guys are getting injured. I had a 14-man team. I think I handed out about 10 Purple Hearts on that one, which is not a bragging thing. It was what it was, fighting around that playground. During that time, we had 3 team commanders in the special operations team. So we get in there May of 12. In June, one of the team commanders, Derek, he gets shot. He's paralyzed. He goes home. In July, I think it was like July 12th, I got shot by a underbarrel grenade launcher. Just sounded like a fly ball went by my head. Cranked off shrapnel all throughout my body. Still have shrapnel in my body right now. My corpsman, he lost his tricep, but to show the type of guy he was, he recovered from that and then went over to SEAL Team 6 right afterwards. And then our dog handler, Joey, he went on a little bit of a vision quest. He took rounds in his stomach. He woke up 2 weeks later in Bethesda kind of going, what the heck just happened, not really knowing. And then later on that deployment, you guys might remember things they were talking about the green on blue incidents. That was when our Afghan allies were kind of turning on us and shoot us in the back essentially, and we would get guys killed. During one of those nights in August of 2012, great guy actually from this area, Captain Matt Manukian. I know he has a highway up here somewhere. Matt's team was doing amazing work. It was actually working up in the area. He was in the northern Helmand province near the Sangin area. You might have heard of that thing. They went out, did their nightly shura, which is a meeting. They go back into the operations center, knock on the door. It's an Afghan cop. And the team chief, Ryan, goes, hey, Matt, do you have a meeting with this guy? And he's like, no. And he's like, all right, he's probably just lost or whatever. It happened all the time. So Ryan's like, I'll take him back to the police station. Ryan walks out. A couple seconds later, you hear a couple of AK rounds go off. That was kind of normal. There'd be a lot of negligent discharge with our Afghan counterparts, so no one really thought much about it at the time. About 5 minutes later, rounds are flying through the operations center. One kind of hit Matt and knocked him into the corner of a room. And if you've ever done house fighting, a corner is not where you want to be because bullets find corners really easily. Matt pulled out his .45, looked at his other teammates, said, guys, get out of here. As they started going out the back door, the attacker came back in with a machine gun, started shooting at those guys. He hit one guy in the arm. He almost lost it. They get out back, and Matt starts fighting with his .45, and unfortunately, Matt being wounded, the guy had kind of the beat on him, and he killed Matt at that point. And then our EOD chief was in another room. He had a total option of walking out a back door. He would have been fine. He was already shot in his stomach. He said, heck with that. He got up and went out to go try to help Matt. Unfortunately, the gunman got on him as well and killed Sky Mode as well. So that was a really rough night for us. You got to think special operations team, 14 guys. You got a team commander down. You got an element leader who's almost lost an arm. You got an EOD chief who's gone. And then when they kind of ran around to look for where's Ryan, well, those first shots was the Afghan shooting Ryan in the back. Ryan was still alive. Got him into the little hospital area they had. He kind of looked up at them, teardrop came out of his eye. We lost Ryan. So now you lost a team chief at that point. So that was a massive hit for a Marine Raider team. And I'll always have a big heart for 7th Marines because they were packed up, ready to go home. They unpacked everything and provided a cordon around the village stability platform to give these guys a little protection. So we kind of went through a lot in that deployment. And when we came back, I mean, there were times guys would come down to my beach house and we might have a case of beer, and I don't even know if we talked. We just kind of sit there and drink and stare off into the ocean, not saying a word. Guys were kind of wondering what they wanted to do with their lives. You had some guys who had some debilitating injuries, guys who were paralyzed, guys who lost limbs. It was pretty rough. And we all kind of started going in our different ways. Some of us stayed in. I hung around for another year or so, then I transitioned out. But I'll never forget the time, and this kind of motivated me where it got to me in this point in my life with Etienne. You know, I'm sitting there with Derek, and as the commando team doing the raids, we were right by the main hospital. So whenever a U.S. Special Forces guy or a Marine attached to a Special Operations unit, we would go over to the hospital to greet them when they would wake up just so they would see someone. So I'm sitting there waiting with Derek, and he's all doped up on drugs at this point, and, you know, it's kind of funny. He's telling me the same story over and over. Like, my nickname's Buck, and he's like, Buck, you got to go kill those guys. I'm like, all right, Derek. And he'd pass out. He'd wake up. Buck, you got to go kill those guys. Cool, Derek. Pass out. Buck, you got to go get those guys. Like, Derek, we're going to be all over it. Don't worry. Let's take care of you. And the doctor looked at me. He's like, can you take the site of blood? I'm like, sure. And he goes, okay. I got to do something right now to Derek. I just want you to talk to him. So he kind of leaned Derek over on the table. We're talking. Derek wipes out. Doctor goes, come here. And I walk over to him. It was kind of like the Charlie Brown talk. It was like, brump, brump, brump. And I'm like just shocked. He's like, you didn't hear a word I said. I'm like, no, you got to tell me again. He goes, what we know right now, Derek is paralyzed. He's like, we don't have the equipment to see how severe it is, but he doesn't have use of his legs. I'm like, okay. So we're sitting there talking. I'm talking with Derek, and he's like talking about combat. And he goes, man, next year I want to do your mission. I want to be the commando guy. You think I could do it? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And eventually he goes back to sleep. And I looked at the doctors. I'm like, when's he going to find out he's paralyzed? And they're like, we're going to tell him in Germany. I'm like, that's not going to happen. I'm like, I'm going to tell him. So when Derek got up, I'm like, buddy, I got to talk to you. And just kind of laid out to him like, hey, this is where we're at right now. And he kind of looked, and he looked at the doctor, and he said, you know, ma'am, my wife and I want to have kids when I go home. Can I still do that? And she goes, well, Derek, not the traditional way right now. And he's like, all right. And he's like, can I get some morphine? They're like, absolutely. Give him morphine. He goes down to sleep. 30 minutes later, he wakes up, and we're talking. And he goes, you know what, man? Screw it. I'll be like Professor X. He's like, this isn't the end of me, man. I'll sit in my wheelchair, and I'm going to figure some things out. And you're just like, you know, he's got some of the most traumatizing news of his life, and he's already thinking forward what he's going to do in his life. You know, I lost a buddy, friend Matt. Matt stepped on an IED. He became a double amputee above both knees, which is a really bad deal. You know, Matt right now, he was the first double amputee special operator to redeploy with silver legs. He was running out there doing ops and everything like that. He's currently working for his State Department, doing some really great things for our country still to this day. And, you know, I kind of took a step back when I got out. I was working for an ed tech firm, making a lot of money, but I just wasn't satisfied. And I kind of poked my head up and said, man, the veterans aren't getting much support. A lot of great nonprofits out there helping the active duty side, but not many on the veteran aspect. And I was just thinking of guys of like Derek and guys like Matt who were just like, the hell with this. I'm going to keep living my life and do things. I'm not a victim. I'm just going to go out there and do great things still. So I started a nonprofit called Battle Brothers Foundation, which I got this hat on, which Etienne's part of. And we've made a three-tier approach of a personal, medical, and economic. Personal, big brother, big sister network. We start talking to the active duty person as they're transitioning out. Just someone to talk to, because as you guys know who are veterans, transition is a lot more difficult than people realize. On the medical side, we help out people if they're suffering with alcohol, opiates, post-traumatic stress, or all the above. We can send them to treatment centers free of charge. And then we also will help out VA disability claims. If you're not at the rating you think you deserve, we'll take it back over free of charge. We'll lobby the VA for you and see if we can increase in your benefits. And then the final phase of that was the economic side. Basically find that veteran a job so they have the same sense of purpose like they did while serving in the military, with them hopefully not making a mistake they can't come back from. So I'm still kind of dealing with my own war at this point. My body's in pain, I can't sleep, and I was introduced to cannabis. Never had an issue with cannabis. I was just kind of an athlete most of my life. I didn't want to put smoke in my lungs. New friends who did it, they looked like they were having a great time. And one guy said to me, he goes, hey man, why don't you just try some cannabis? I'm like, sure, why not? And it was like a warm blanket enveloped itself around my brain. It was the first time I felt at peace with myself and I was able to get a full night of sleep. So I kept using it and I'm like, man, this is great. I can walk down, I'm 100% disabled. I can go to a VA, get 15 pills like that. Why are we not just saying this one little vape cart or whatever it may be can solve so many problems without making me feel just, I'll just say it, mental on all those drugs they're putting you on. So I had an opportunity to meet with a couple members of the U.S. Congress, and I said in so many words, what do you guys need to get this into the VA system? They said, if you can go get data and have American doctors back it, you're going to have a good argument. So through that, I partnered with a firm out of Israel called Niametic Healthcare Research Services. We know how advanced Israel is in their cannabis research. And they're telling me we're going to need a thing called an institutional review board. And I'm like, well, what is that? They're like, it falls under the FDA. It means you can do human trials. It's really hard to get. It's a Schedule I drug, and you're probably not going to get much funding, so good luck. I'm like, okay. So looking at Paul Newman's salad dressing bottle, we came up with an idea of why don't we just do an adult use brand that we can take 100% of profits and put it back to our research so we can get this done. So I came up with a brand that's sold here in California called Hellman Valley Growers Company. The 4 letters HVGs here are very significant to Marine Raiders. If you serve in the Hellman province, you become part of the Hellman Valley Gun Club, and you get one of those bad boys on you right there. So I wanted to kind of pay homage to the legends of the Hellman. Went to all the Raiders, said, hey guys, this is what I'm thinking of doing. This is what I want to call it. If you're not good with the name, I'll change it, and I'll figure something else out. And they said, not only are we cool with the name, can we get a job with you when we get out? And I'm like, well, that's absolutely what we want to do, is have veterans making medicine for veterans. So Hellman Valley started up with our first $50,000 worth of profits. We put that back to the study design, went through the whole IRB process, very difficult. We didn't have a DEA license. We did not want to work with the National Institute of Drug Abuse or NIDA program. We wanted to control it ourselves and get a private IRB. And these things are typically saved for like universities, colleges, or medical groups. But we were awarded one to see if medical cannabis can reduce the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And with that, we were able to bring University of California at Irvine on top to be our principal investigator, which means you'll have Israeli doctors working with U.S. veterans and American doctors validating everything, and that's what Congress said they needed. We'll do a 300 veteran study here in California. We'll have a treatment protocol and a formulation. From there, we're going to move into probably Colorado, work with the VA in the eastern Colorado sector, prove it's repeatable and accessible. And then I've gone about as far as I can go. And just like Etienne said, we're already talking with Congress. They'll give us a platform. We'll raise our right hand. There's your data. There's your American doctors. Can we proceed with FDA trials with the end state of getting our medical cannabis product into the VA, thus making medical cannabis federally legal for all patients? We just want to put it on the back of veterans because we can look at Congress and say, you sent us to war. Now it's your turn to fix us. So some of the things I want to talk about that's helped me with my trauma is just that right there. I was making a grip of cash doing something different, but I was always told myself I'll never work for money. Right now, what I find so therapeutic is I still feel, and I'm sure Etienne does as well, we're still serving our country. We're not wearing camis, we're not doing that stuff, but we're helping the boys and girls who are ultimately will have to go back down range and going to have to return. You know, we all return physically, but maybe not spiritually, and we want to be that beacon in the night that lives and puts them back on that path to live that American dream they fought so hard to defend. And I guess a big thing I just want to kind of really put out to all of you is, you know, when I start working with veterans, the first thing I tell them is you're not a victim. You know, no one owes you anything. I know that's really hard to hear, but this is an all-volunteer force, and it's a beautiful thing that we have in this country, that men and women say, hey, I'll go, let's get this on, and I'm going to take care of everyone back home. But what we need to do is get you back to that ass-kicker mentality of saying, you had the guts and the intestinal fortitude to raise your hand to say, I'll go fight. We need to get you back in that mindset because you got a lot more fighting to do right here. I don't care if you're in a wheelchair. I don't care if you're missing legs. Get over it. Life's hard. You got dealt a bad hand, but there's so much more you can do because if you have there and you sit about negative things, I guarantee all you're going to produce is negative outputs. And then from there, we put the veteran through the whole process. Whatever we have to do in terms making it for them. Some just need jobs. Some just need therapy. Some want to be part of medical research. Some need VA help. It doesn't matter. We're going to sit there and customize it to that veteran to meet their needs so they can go off and do some great things for all of us still. So, hey, really appreciate you guys. Thank you for your time. We want to, I don't know how much time we got, but if we got any questions or anything, we got 5 minutes. So if you guys got any questions for us or anything, I got some brochures I'd love to hand you guys from Battle Brothers so you can learn more about what we've done. But please, we'll open up to all of you.
Yep.
Anything?
Any questions? Anybody got any questions?
Yes, sir.
Have you found that retailers are receptive and supportive of the brand, knowing what stands behind it, or are they just looking at potency and price?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say 1 out of 10 in the initial meeting get it. Like, usually they're like, well, what kind of BOGO deal can I get? Or what about this? And I'm like, dude, I'll hook you up with BOGOs. Don't worry, man. We'll get the thing moving. I'm like, hear what I'm saying. But I was just at a dispensary down in San Diego the other week, and as I'm talking, the female buyer goes, wait a minute. If this works, this is good for the entire community. I'm like, bingo. I'm like, Hollywood actors, athletes, they're not going to get it done. The veterans will, because, again, we're kind of toxic for Congress people. They can't say screw the veterans. I mean, that's pretty much they're done at that point. So it's like, again, ride our backs, and we're going to get this thing across the goal line. So not as much as I would like, and I wish more would, but we're going to kind of keep pushing it and showing what we're doing. But on the good side, thanks to the great advice by Etienne, he's like, get your bad boy up into the Emerald Cup and see what you do. And we took second place, and it's literally with this strain called Afghanimal. I'm going to be honest with you, I got lucky with that one. I thought, hey, Helmand Valley, Afghanistan, HVGC, Afghanimal kind of works marketing. And we literally put animal cookies and Afghan Kush together. We gave it to the Israelis, and they were like, what the heck did you put in here? And I'm like, oh, crap, that was like my first run. And I'm like, I tell them, they're like, this is doing exactly what the medicine should be doing. It's like you feel euphoric, you're feeling good, and you get a great night of sleep. Keep going what you're going with that one. So whenever I have a vet saying, I can't sleep, I'm like, easy, Afghanimal, go for it. We have a huge success rate with that with both athletes and veterans.
Other questions? Anyone?
I have found that sativa can adversely affect me. And actually, it's something that I'm a heavy indica user, and that so much of the donations that we receive often are sativa. So I think it's something that people don't really talk about in terms of PTSD. So I wanted you to address that.
Yeah, I'll just tell you what the Israeli doctors have told us. So for our research, they're like, we're not going to have anything sativa. They're like, it's either going to be a hybrid or indica, because they've seen sativas kind of raise it up on some people, and they don't want them that way to be kind of jumpy and more anxious. And furthermore, I mean, there's the good and the bad with everything. If you have a history of psychosis, you're not going to be eligible for our study, because the Israelis are like, we have seen that exacerbate and kind of awaken in people. So that's another kind of disqualification thing. So again, I never tell people cannabis is for everyone, but it should be a tool in the toolkit that if it makes sense, we should prescribe it. And Colin Wells was going to be here, but he's very big in the psychedelic realm. There's people who came to me saying, I need some cannabis. I'm like, no, you need to talk to Colin. I think you need to do a different journey.
We also have to correct our nomenclature, because there's been recent discussions that by actual botanists, by doing gene testing, they found that what they thought was an indica growing in the mountains was the same plant growing as a sativa in the lower lands. So it actually turns out to be how you grow the cannabis. And technically, we're only smoking indicas. Sativa is considered the hemp that we grow and we use industrially. Yes, it does have the CBD in it, etc. But if you look at books by Dr. Rob Clark and Dr. McPartland, they all specify through actual gene mapping and looking at the plant that it's more of the chemovars. And so what we have, and Berkeley Patients Group was a pioneer in testing back in 08, 09, we found that a lot of the flowers that were out in California had similar chemical structures. The difference was the terpenes and the terpene profiles that were there. And so that had helped us understand, because I was a patient myself. I used to have Marinol. Marinol or dronabinol is just synthetic THC suspended in a sesame capsule. It was very inconsistent, and if you took too many, you got anxiety, and if you didn't take enough, you didn't get an effect. The problem is Marinol costs $60 a pill, and it costs $1,500 just to fill one pill bottle of 60. Okay, so needless to say, my insurance company shit the bed when they saw the actual cost of it and rejected it. Fortunately, my doctor's like, they do this to everybody. They reject you, you have to resubmit, then you'll get it. And I'll be darned, I got it, and it paid for it. But I found that by just taking the Marinol or dronabinol, it wasn't the same as the effect when I was ingesting or smoking cannabis. And that to me was an understanding that there was something definitely happening that was different. I just didn't understand, or we didn't have the nomenclature that we understand now, because the testing that we see here has gone beyond just the THC and CBD. As we see, we've got the various terpenes and terpene profiles. So we teach our patients to understand that these terpenes and terpene profiles, you need to document as best as you can in a notebook and find what works for you. The problem is you find what works for you and then you cannot find it again, or it's gone out of stock and you have to wait for that rotation to come. So we have to help growers understand the need for the diverse chemovars, those equatorials that can have an effect, but those also grown at the higher mountains, or those that are in a higher desert, because the crystals on the plant are the natural protection for the plant from the ultraviolet radiation. The more ultraviolet radiation, the higher you are, the higher crystal count, which is why they really love those types of indicas, because they were sugary and frosty, because the plant was using the sun as its natural biological trigger to say, hey, it's too high here, we don't like it. So that's why stuff growing out throughout the mountains and the mountain regions has a special something to it that happens out in nature that science has yet to replicate and understand, the same way we have yet to see any terpene company that makes food-grade terpenes replicate anything cannabis-related. It hasn't even come close. It usually tastes candy, it tastes fake, it doesn't taste true to itself. So educate yourself, educate others, but also educate yourself by documentation. Take a notebook, and when you try things, write when you were having it, why you were having it, how much you're taking, and understand your dosage so that you don't go too far. I recommend this especially with edibles, because as you know, smoking's one thing. Edibles are a whole other journey altogether, and once you're committed on that journey, you're on the ride. So be careful. And, keep an eye out for the future.
He's really smart.
I've learned a little bit about cannabis. Zochi?
Thank you. I'm glad you addressed the idea, the topic of terpenes, because that's really key. And you'll see over here on one of the walls, there's an illustration about that. The farm that I'm part of, I work with Noble Gardens, and so we list the terpene profile on our products, and not enough farms are doing that, because that is absolutely the key, and it's less of the indica sativa issue and more of the terpene profiles. And we're on the top of that mountain where it's super hot, so our terpene profiles are very rich.
Well, this is where we need to be active, because now this is something you can take to the state of California and say, hey, we want to see this. Because when I'm also a judge for the Emerald Cup, which is a different competition, and I've been doing that for 8 years, and one of the things they do is they educate us on the terpene and the terpene profiles, because it is key to understanding where what you have, because of the misinformation regarding indica and sativa outright. So but this is where we can be working currently. We know that I think next year we're going to have to be lobbying for compassionate giving again. We know SB 34 kind of expires, so we're all going to be working together to get that. But this is where we can take that into the discussion and say, hey, we need these companies to be listing these, because in states like Pennsylvania, they do. They have a full terpene profile list on every product that you purchase. So now you can understand what similar funny names, because as you know, there's so many different funny names with cannabis, it gets so confusing. But if you start to understand the chemical or chemo profile of the flower, now you're getting a better understanding to finding what works specifically for you. So narrow it down and help yourself understand, and then you can teach others to do the same. Thank you.
Welcome home, Bryan. Welcome home, Etienne. Big fan of you both. HVGC is a vape cartridge. These things weren't really around 20 years ago. I know Etienne's a big fan of concentrates. Can you maybe just say a bit to anyone that's listening why expanding our consumption beyond the buds, beyond the flower, might be beneficial?
I think it's like personal choice of that aspect. And for me, I kind of have to talk like a business side. For us to kind of get into the market, we really thought the vape side was going to be probably the least expensive to go. And I find it too, now that COVID's kind of subdued and people are back traveling and stuff, you see, a lot of people like to come to California to visit. So they're not going to want to go roll a joint or buy flower. They're just going to grab a vape and go, especially like disposables. Even my buddy Ian Deitch, who's an outstanding cultivator, he was here for a long time. Unfortunately, the price of flower dropped. It wiped him out. But he's over working for a company in New York right now who's just a pretty new market. And he's like, dude, you'll be amazed. Like, flower's king, right? Like, everyone loves flower. He goes, each quarter, flower sales keep dropping, and the vape keep going up. And it's like, it's just the market. They want vape out there. People just don't want to go and do all that stuff. They just want to grab and go. So it kind of just depends on you as a consumer, I think.
I learned about concentrates myself. I was a kind of a water hash guy. I liked making my own. I had one of the original isolators. I was fortunate to work at a head shop in LA that got one of the earlier isolators, which was kind of a rubber, clear rubber plastic that had a screen, and you used a egg beater basically on the top to stimulate the buds with ice. It would settle and come all the way down. So in the late 90s, that was what I was doing. I really enjoyed it. I would take all of my hashes and then put them into a coffee grinder and grind them all together, because I was finding I like the entire cannabinoid spectrum. Sometimes some flowers do this for me, some things do this for me. With concentrates, I found that. So I used that for water hash. But then I saw shatter and sugar and crumble start to come in, and I saw a lot of my older patients at Berkeley Patients Group actually buying this, and it was expensive. So I would go to them and I would ask them, why did you purchase this? And they were like, well, for the simple fact that I get more bang for my buck. I'm like, wait, what do you mean by that? Well, with the special tools, which it does require some special tools to use some of these extracts, by using things like titanium and quartz, I can do one dab, and that gets me where I need to be. Just one hit. And by having something concentrated, they found that they were doing less harm reduction to their body, because one of the things we find is, I have Gulf War syndrome, so I have this forever. It doesn't go away. So my pain, my nerve damage, and all the things from my chemical exposure, I have to treat till I'm dead. So the VA, of course, is more than happy, and all of us will attest, they will shove all the pills down us that we don't want with all the contraindications, and then you add that to life, and then I think, remember, I had a hypochondriac mother who took a lot of drugs and ruined her system, so I've seen family member's life destroyed by taking too many pharmaceuticals. I found with cannabis, and by using concentrated cannabis, I'm using less, and I'm not spending as much as I would if I were buying ounces of weed, which I used to do, and literally roll up an eighth as a joint for the day. You have 8 to 10 joints a day. It's not cheap, that's why I became a grower. But at the same time, it's also a realization and why we have to do compassionate giving and give back. Ryan over here does Operation EVAC and has been one of the brave veterans organizing and helping veterans get access to medical cannabis today for free. Even in the years since 2018, we would still buy the cannabis, give it to Ryan to give away to his people, because that's just the reality. We had to work together in Sacramento to change the law into now what's known as SB 34, so that we can charitably give away free cannabis. He can give it to his free veterans. He can make sure that those veterans have it, and they can do it at my dispensary if they need to legally, okay? So we've seen many people benefit from this, and unfortunately, that's going to expire. So that requires us to be eternally vigilant. That's the price of liberty, ladies and gentlemen. So we have to go to Sacramento and work to change the laws so our brothers and sisters can continue to get it for free in California, because currently this week there's about 250 patients that receive free cannabis from Berkeley Patients Group because they're low income, sick, and ill. That's something that nobody else is out there willing to help or subsidize. And unfortunately, a lot of these MSOs do not have charitable giving. Unfortunately, California leads the entire country in doing what we do in giving charitable giving, which is giving free to our vets, because these places want to donate cannabis out of their heart to help our veterans, and they're doing so. And fortunately, it's brave men like this that are making it happen today. So, give them a round of applause for what they're doing to help people to have access today, because it took people from the federal government decades to sue the government to win the right for medical cannabis. I didn't bring it with me, I have the first tin that was issued in October of 1976 by the United States government. And your government has been supplying crappy cannabis with seeds and stems wrapped in heavy paper. Delivered in that tin is 300 joints a month, 10 per day, and it is awful. And if you want to remember what it's like in the 70s, smoke one of those joints and you can smell the seeds still in them. And remember those wonderful aromas when you're like, shit, it's a seed. So, if you don't smoke cannabis, seeds are not a good thing. Smoking them smells terrible, it is awful. All of us work hard to make sure there are no seeds in your joints. That disclaimer accordingly. So, thank you. And I think that's it.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody. We had a great panel up next, which Bryan will actually be leading. So I'd like to thank Bryan Buckley.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm Etienne Fontan. Thank you very much, and happy Veterans Day to all the veterans. Thank you for your service.